Hello everyone, my name is Design Team Alf Nasreen and I'm from downloadscrafts.ie, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make this card using your sentiment as your focal piece with a few tips and tricks along the way. So I start my card with a 6x6 folded card, which is just a blank, and then I will have two cards which are made from Nina's Solar cardstock. One will be for the sentiment and one will be for the design element, and then I will have two matting cards. Even though I'm showing silver here, later on I will switch it out for a green. So the one card is 5.5 by 5.5 and the other one is just big enough to fit my sentiment, and this will be my matting card, which will be 6 by 6, and it fits my card perfectly. And then this part will just mat my sentiment, and the stamp set that I'm using is 3 sentiments, and I'm taking one and it's going to be my focal piece, and the card will lay out just like this, although I will change the color of the back paper. So now I'm using my 5x5 cardstock and I'm going to design some pattern paper. Now you could use a stencil if you like, if you're looking for something different, but I'm going to show you now using a stamp from your stash how you can make your own pattern paper. Now I'm using this lip stamp that I have in my stash because I only use it really for Valentine's Day, and if I can use it for another occasion then I think that's great. And this is a stamp I'll be using, and it says meet me under the mistletoe, and that reminds me of kisses, so that's why I'm using this lip stamp. And I'm going to be stamping using my distressed oxide ink, which gives me a matte finish, but you could use any colored ink that you have or any different stamp. This is just a good way to design your own paper how you like it. If you're handy with Photoshop, you could Photoshop some different images and make them into your own pattern paper, but this way it's just easier, and it gives you something to get creative, to use stamps that are in your stash, and you don't have to buy a whole set of pattern paper if you want to use just one piece that has lips on it. And I'm using the red ink because it makes it look like kisses, and this card is good for a partner, girlfriend, boyfriend, maybe an office crush or somebody that you like and you want to give it to them. And it's just a bit of a cute card, and because the sentiment had kisses on it, that's why I'm using this. And yeah, you could use, like I said, the stencil or some other method. So that is my finished cardstock, and as you can see, it's unique and it's one of a kind and it's something different, and I really like just the plain white and red. Now for the next part, you'll be needing a stamping press or something similar. This is just a photo frame that I got from IKEA and it's been used quite a bit. So I'm going to be double stamping my sentiment, and that's the main focal point. And I'm making sure it's very secure down because I will be having to stamp over the same place twice. If you're very handy and you are correct, you can use a clear stamping block to stamp twice, but this just helps. And if you don't have a stamping press, you can use a CD case or something similar. Now I'm choosing my focal piece, which will be the center, and I'm using a citrus colored distress oxide, and I'll be stamping it twice to make sure I get a really good stamp. So what I'm going to be doing is I'll be stamping this with the color, then I'll be stamping it again with the Versamark ink, and then I will be embossing it with a clear sparkle embossing powder. And this is just a fun way to add some sparkle to a card. Now if you're new to embossing and you do find it a bit intimidating, as I did in the beginning, there really is no need to fear it. You basically need two things. You'll need a stamping pad, which is a Versamark, and it's very hard to find an alternative or something else, so I would recommend, if you're going to get one thing, get a Versamark stamping pad, which is basically like a clear ink, and then you use your embossing powder. Now if you only want to start off with one embossing powder, then I recommend this method and using a clear or a shimmery sparkly clear embossing powder. So you can mix up the color of your inks and then emboss over it, and you'll have an embossed look using your own inks. So instead of buying a green embossing powder that I'll probably just use only now at Christmas time, and I'm going to be using my a sparkle emboss over it. So yeah, and then I'm just making sure that my stamp is cleaned properly, and now I'm going to stamp it with my Versamark. Another benefit of using a clear embossing powder is if you do get some static or some bits do stick to the paper, because it's clear it won't show up, whereas if you used a very dark color you will see those bits that did show up and stuck to the paper. Now I'm just using a piece of plain cartridge paper or printer paper to catch my powder. Now there is a third component. Like I said, there is embossing powder and the ink. Now the third component is a heating tool. Now the heating tools can be a bit expensive, but hey, it's Christmas time, so you might want to add it to your Christmas list. But if you don't have an a heat tool, do not fear, you can use a toaster if you are very careful, or the hob of your stove. Just pop the toaster down and put your paper with embossing and hover it above the toaster. The heat rising up will melt the plastic in the embossing and give you a very good emboss. But you have to be very careful to move the paper around because you don't want to burn it. Also use some tweezers, because I used this with my hands and I did kind of burn it quite a bit. But if you get a heating tool, it is a multitasker. You can use it for many things, and I do recommend you get one. But a toaster will work just as well. And there's my finished sentiment, and you can see the sparkle. Now I've had this pot of embossing powder for over 5 years, and as you can see it's very full. So one pot of embossing powder will last you a very long time. Just make sure to move the paper around a lot and the heat source as well, because you do not want to burn your paper. Now, as I did say, I switched out my matting because I decided that I did not get the full extent of the stamp, and I wanted to use the stamp more, and I thought the green was going to stand out better against the red and the white paper. So the thing I'm doing here is exactly the same as the patterned paper that I created, except because this will be a matting layer, you do not need to go all the way around to the center. If this was your main focal piece, then you could stamp it perfectly the way I did with the lip stamp, but I just need this on the edges and I wanted to get more use out of this stamp. So I'm also using a method which is called tone on tone stamping. That's where you use the same color ink on the paper, and it's a very subtle look, but it's also very striking as well. Also, when working with green and red, it's important to remember that these are contrasting colors, so you have to use them in a way that's clever. For example, I kept the red on one paper and the green on the other paper. If I used red and stamped on this green paper, it would be a bit harsh on the eyes, and so keeping them in their different layers is a nice way to kind of color block. And this is also a fun way to get the sentiment, to get the most out of your sentiment and your set. And even though it is very subtle, it still does have a high impact. And as you can see, I left the center out because I will be using that just for a layer, a mat. But the top part, this is probably how you could do it if you're making your own paper. Pattern paper, sorry. I love this green. This is really my favorite color green. I love citrusy greens, and I think the colors really pop with the white, the green and the red. At face value it doesn't look extremely Christmassy, but when you read the sentiment it does read Christmas. Now that I have my pattern paper and my sentiments done and my layers, my mats and my layers, it's just time to... Oh, sorry, I forgot about this step. Now, this is something else you can do with your Versamark and your embossing. I just rub the ink down the side of the card just to give it a little bit of sparkle so that it will match up with my sentiment. So I just brush the side of the Versamark against the paper, and once again I'm going to emboss it. So I'm just going to run my embossing powder over it, and this time instead of burning my fingers I did use a tweezers, which I do recommend, and a bit of the glitter stuck to the wet ink, but that doesn't matter because it's going to be a matting card anyway. So I'm just going to show you now. I'm going to do some embossing, and it's very satisfying watching the matte embossing powder turn all glossy and shiny. And please be careful if you have this tool because it does get very, very hot. Yeah, a bit of sparkle and shine. It's a nice way to add something extra to the card without any super big embellishments. Now you can see I did the same with the 6x6 card, and it's very subtle, but it does have a lot of sparkle to it. So I just did the edges because it is going to be a matting card. Now I'm going to put the card together. So now you can see I have those two matting layers, and I have my sentiment and I have my designed card. Now I decided I wanted to anchor it a bit more, so I did bring up a red marker and I ran it around the edges, and this will just anchor the card a bit more and give it a clean line. And I did the same with the sentiment as well as with the pattern paper. And it's just an extra layer that you can give, because this card is very plain. You could add a lot of extra sparkle, you could add ribbons, you could add tags, you can add anything you like. I like to keep the card simple, so I just added a little bit of embellishment at the end, and I just like to keep it clean. But you are free to add whatever you like. Just be careful when you run your marker along, you don't want to destroy your paper. And now I'm going to use a very strong glue. You can use any glue you like, but I wouldn't recommend using a glue stick, because the paper has been embossed, it's warped a little bit, and there is some chunky glue embossing on there, so you're going to need something that's going to give you a good firm hold. I'm using this craft glue over here and making sure that I'm going to get a very good and secure fix from the matte paper to the 6x6 card. As you can see here, I'll just line it up, and I'm going to press it so hard to make sure that it doesn't come apart, because that's the last thing you want when you give somebody a card. So I use the very strong glue on the 6x6 embossed paper. I'm also going to use the same glue to secure my sentiment to that small little matte layer. And then when it comes to adding the pattern paper and adding the sentiment to the card, I'm going to be using double-sided tape. So as I said, I don't like a lot of embellishments on my work. Some people do. This is just my style, and but I do like a bit of dimension, and I feel like the foam tape just gives it an extra pop and makes it stand off the card without adding too much bulk, because when you're sending something to the mail, especially where I am, they love to charge you extras if the envelope is just a little bit thick. So I like to keep my cards very flat, but if I do give them to somebody in the hand, I probably will add a little bit more embellishment. And here I'm just adding the double-sided tape, and it's not a very thick double-sided tape, it's actually kind of thin, so it just pops off the page a bit. But this double-sided tape, foam tape, is very, very sticky and tacky, so make sure if you stick it down it's in the right place, because you don't want to have to lift it again if you make a mistake. And this foam tape also gives a very good secure stick to the paper, because it does stick between the little bits of glitter that embossed. And now you don't have to emboss your card. You can use Mod Podge with a bit of glitter added to it, or if you're handy with glitter and glue and you know a way that makes it not fly off all over the page and leave glitter all over the receiver's hands, then you can use that. It doesn't have to be embossing. I'm just showing you a different method and the way that I like to use it. But like I said, you can just use some glue, you can use glitter pens, you can use the Wink of Stella, anything you like to give it a little bit of sparkle. You don't have to use only embossing, but in this video I wanted to show you the way that I made the card. And now I'm going to add a little bit of double-sided foam tape to the sentiment, and the sentiment is my main focal piece. Now I did add a little bit of bling because one of my statements, one of my things that I love to do is add these little diamonds that I got from a very cheap shop, but I suppose you can pick them up anyway. They're great to have in your stash. They're just tiny little sticky blings, and people use them to embellish their phones and all those type of things. So I love them in card making, and it's very small, but it is very effective, and it does add just an extra bit of something to the card. And the rule of thumb is, if you're gonna add embellishment, add them in threes. So I did add 3 little red bling bling dots, and it does make it look like little berries on the mistletoe, and it's something special. I didn't want to add too much to this card because I did want to keep it simple, but I think it really does add an extra pop and an extra dimension to this card without adding extra bulk. As you can see, I've used those bling dots quite a bit. They come in very handy. If you just need to add a little bit extra but you're not sure what, these are lovely to add to the card. And you can see they look like little berries. Like I said as well, if you don't want your card to have the cheeky lips on them, even though they do go with the sentiment, you can use stencils, or you can color in, or you can print out paper, or any paper. But I think this card is cohesive and it looks pretty, and I think I'm going to give it to my husband as a little card for Valentine's / Christmas. It's not extremely Christmas because I don't celebrate Christmas, but I think he'll appreciate the sentiment. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it, and I will see you in my next video. Make sure to check out all the links to Downland Craft socials in the link down below. Until then, keep well and goodbye.